Arthur's case came through my courtroom on a rainy Thursday morning in Providence, Rhode Island. After more than 40 years on the bench, I've seen just about every kind of case you can imagine. I've seen anger, excuses, stubbornness, regret, and heartbreak. Over time, you start to think there are no surprises left. You begin to believe human nature has shown you all its cards. But every once in a while, someone walks into that courtroom and reminds you that real life is still more powerful than anything written in a case file. Arthur was one of those people. Before I tell you what happened, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had a moment in life where one small bill turned into a mountain you couldn't climb? If you know what it feels like to be overwhelmed by life, type I understand in the comments, not for the algorithm. Just because stories like this are real and real people live them every day. That morning, the rain was pounding against the tall courthouse windows. People were filing in one after another, dripping water from their jackets, clutching traffic tickets, unpaid fines, and paperwork they barely understood. It looked like an ordinary court day. On my desk sat the usual stack of files. Most of them were routine. Then I picked up Arthur's file. On paper, the case looked simple. An expired vehicle registration, original fine, $60. But the moment that fine wasn't paid, the machine started rolling. Late fees were added. Court costs were piled on. Administrative penalties followed. Then came a warrant. By the time Arthur stood in front of me, that original $60 problem had turned into a $450 debt, and the state was prepared to send him to jail for 5 days if he couldn't pay it. That's the kind of thing the paperwork says very cleanly. It lists numbers, dates, violations, compliance failures. But paperwork never tells you who the person really is. It never tells you what road they had to walk to get there. When the bailiff called Arthur's name, I looked up and watched him make his way to the podium. He didn't look like a criminal. He didn't look like someone trying to play games with the court. He looked like a tired man who had run out of room to breathe. His work boots were soaked. His jacket looked old and worn at the seams. His shoulders were bent in that particular way they get when someone has been carrying worry for too long. He took off his faded cap, held it respectfully to his chest, and said in a low, tired voice, "Good morning, Your Honor." There was no attitude in his voice, no arrogance, just exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from one long day, but from months of pressure. The kind that keeps a man awake at night, staring into the dark, trying to figure out how he's supposed to hold everything together with almost nothing left. I looked down at the file, then back at him. "And Arthur," I said, "you're here because of an unpaid registration ticket. It began at $60, and now, with fees and penalties, it stands at $450. There's also an active warrant attached to this case. Is that correct?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." I took off my glasses and leaned forward a little. "Help me understand how we got from $60 to this." He swallowed hard. For a second, I thought he might not be able to speak at all. Then he looked down at the crumpled paper in his hand and said, "Judge, my daughter got sick, real sick. She has asthma. One night she couldn't breathe, and I had to rush her to the emergency room." The courtroom became very still. He continued, "The hospital visit took everything I had. Then came the inhalers, the medication, follow-up visits. I do landscaping, Your Honor. When it rains, I don't work. If I don't work, I don't get paid. That week I had $60 left. Just 60, and I had to make a choice." He paused there, and when he looked up at me, his eyes were full of the kind of pain that doesn't need any exaggeration. "I could pay the registration," he said, "or I could buy the medicine that helped my little girl breathe." Then he said the line that silenced the room. "I chose my daughter." Nobody moved. There are some moments in a courtroom when the law is sitting in front of you, but humanity is standing right beside it, asking you what kind of person you're going to be. That was one of those moments. Arthur wasn't standing there making excuses. He wasn't trying to dodge responsibility. He was telling the truth, a brutal truth that millions of working people understand all too well. Sometimes life doesn't hand you two good options. Sometimes it forces you to choose which disaster you can survive. He chose his daughter's breathing over a government fee, and the truth is, any decent parent would have done the same. I asked him, "What happened after that?" He let out a breath and said, "I kept trying to catch up. Every time I got close, something else came up. Rent, groceries, school clothes, medicine, and every time I fell behind, the fees got worse. It just kept growing. I'm trying, Judge, I really am, but I'm drowning." That word stayed with me. Drowning. Because that's what the system can do to people who are already struggling. It takes a small problem and turns it into a wall. And once someone is trapped behind that wall, every attempt to climb out costs more than they have. I looked at Arthur and asked him something simple. Tell me honestly, what do you have with you today? Right now. If you emptied your pockets, what could you actually afford to pay without taking food away from your child? His hand began to shake as he reached into his jacket pocket. Slowly, carefully, he laid everything on the podium. A wrinkled $20 bill, a few fives, some $1 bills, loose change. He counted it with trembling fingers. $73.40, he said quietly. That's everything I've got. And then I saw something else sitting beside the money, a small, yellow receipt. I pointed to it with my pen. What's that? Arthur lowered his eyes immediately. His face changed. Shame has a way of arriving fast and silently. He looked like he wanted to cover it up, like he hoped maybe I wouldn't ask again. But I did. Arthur, I said, softer this time, what is that yellow paper? He took a shaky breath. A pawn ticket, sir. What did you pawn? For a moment he couldn't answer. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, my wedding band. The entire room froze. He went on, voice breaking now. My wife passed away 5 years ago. Breast cancer. That ring. It's all I had left that was hers. I went to the pawn shop this morning before coming to court. They gave me $40 for it. I thought if I could get close to 100, maybe I wouldn't go to jail. I sat there staring at that yellow slip of paper. A man had walked into a pawn shop in the rain and surrendered the last symbol of his marriage, the last physical reminder of the woman he loved, just to try to stay out of jail over an expired registration ticket. That's bigger than debt. That's bigger than a violation. That's what desperation looks like when it has nowhere left to go. I looked at Arthur and then at the people in the gallery. Some of them were already wiping tears from their eyes. They weren't just reacting to his words. They were reacting to the realization that this could happen to anyone living one emergency away from collapse. I leaned forward and said, Arthur, put your money back in your pocket. He looked up at me, confused. You are not paying this court $73 today, I said. You are taking that money home. You are going to use it for your daughter. He blinked, like he wasn't sure he had heard me right. I picked up my pen and looked at the file. As for the late fees, the penalties, the warrant fee, and the court costs, dismissed, completely dismissed. You owe this court nothing. The courtroom released a breath all at once. Arthur's face changed in a way I'll never forget. It was not the look of someone who had simply caught a break. It was the look of someone who had been carrying fear in his chest for so long that he forgot what relief even felt like. His shoulders dropped. His eyes filled. He tried to speak, but emotion caught him first. Thank you, Judge, he finally managed. But I wasn't done. Because the fine may have been gone, but that pawn ticket was still sitting there. I pointed to it. How much does it take to get the ring back? He looked down. $50 with fees. I nodded. Then I reached into my own wallet. I pulled out a $50 bill and handed it to the bailiff to give to Arthur. Arthur stared at it like it made no sense. No, sir, he said quickly. I can't take your money. I work for mine. I don't take charity. I looked right at him and said, this isn't charity. This is a man helping another man keep what matters. He said nothing. I continued, go get your wife's ring back. That ring doesn't belong behind glass with a price tag on it. It belongs with you. And someday, if you choose, it belongs with your daughter. At that point, Arthur completely broke down, not in embarrassment, not in weakness, in relief, in grief, in gratitude, in the release of months, maybe years of pressure. He covered his face with both hands and cried right there at the podium, the kind of crying that comes from the deepest place in a human being when they finally realize that today, at least today, life is not going to crush them. He took the $50 bill and the pawn receipt, held them against his chest, nodded through tears, and walked out of that courtroom changed. And I mean changed. The man who walked in looked defeated. The man who walked out looked like he had been given a piece of himself back. What happened next was something I'll never forget. After Arthur left, a woman sitting in the gallery stood up, walked over quietly, and placed a $20 bill on the clerk's desk. She said, if someone else needs help today, use this. Then another person stood up, then another. In a matter of moments, strangers who had come in only thinking about their own problems were reaching into their pockets to help someone they had never met. That is what compassion can do. It doesn't stop with one person. It moves through a room. It reminds people who they are. 2 weeks later, I got a letter in Chambers. The envelope was plain and slightly crumpled. The return address simply said, Arthur and Sarah. Inside was a photograph of a little girl smiling brightly, holding a handmade sign that said, Thank you, Judge. Standing behind her was Arthur, cleaner, stronger, smiling in a way he hadn't been able to smile in court. And there, clearly visible on his hand, was the gold wedding band. There was also a handwritten note. He wrote that he had gone straight from the courthouse to the pawn shop. He got the ring back. Then he went home and bought Sarah a hot dinner. He wrote that he had kept his job. In fact, he had even gotten promoted to crew leader because he showed up for work Monday morning instead of sitting in jail. Then he wrote something I still remember word for word in spirit, even if not perfectly in language. He said, You didn't just help me with a fine. You gave me my dignity back. You gave my daughter her father back. And tucked inside that envelope was $5. His first attempt to pay me back. I'm telling you honestly, after all these years on the bench, that $5 bill meant more to me than almost anything else I've ever received, not because of the amount, because of what it represented. Character, gratitude, self-respect. A man who had almost nothing still wanted to repay a kindness because that's who he was. Of course, I sent it back and told him the debt was already paid in full. His only responsibility was to keep being the father his daughter needed. That day reminded me of something I never want to forget. The law matters, rules matter, responsibility matters. But if justice has no room for mercy, then it becomes something cold and blind. Arthur didn't need to be crushed. He needed to be seen. He needed someone to look past the paperwork and recognize the human being underneath it. And that is what too many systems forget. Behind every fine is a person. Behind every court date is a story. Behind every late payment is a life that may be hanging on by a thread. So let me ask you this. Do you believe real justice should come with compassion? If you do, leave a like and tell me in the comments. Because stories like Arthur's matter. They remind us that even in hard places, humanity still has a pulse. I'm Judge Frank Caprio. And remember this. Sometimes the biggest thing you can give someone is not money, not even forgiveness. It's the simple dignity of being seen.